Good morning, book lovers. It's Robert Boyd coming at you with another book report. The book this time is Haiku, uh, poems by Diane Prima, illustrated by George Herms. And I want to, before I start, this time I'm going to do something a little different. I'm gonna mimic Robin O'Neill, who on her podcast reads poems that she likes and so on. So I'm going to read some of my favorites from this collection. They're all very short, so I don't think I'll bore too many of you, but I'll probably bore some of you. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about Diane Prima and George Herms. Prima was a poet who died very recently. She died October 25th of this year, and she was born in 1934. She came up in Manhattan, in the Manhattan poetry scene, founded a theater with Leroy Jones, later known as Amiri Baraka. And so she was a prime beatnik poet. And she wrote a famous memoir called Memoirs of a Beatnik in 1988. I haven't read it yet. I think it'd probably be pretty fascinating, so I'll put it on my list. George Herms is an artist, born in 1935 and still alive as far as Wikipedia knows. He's an assemblage artist, and he was friends with Wallace Berman, who helped Herms realize that ordinary bits of detritus could have poetic meaning. And like Berman, turned that knowledge into assemblage art. He helped Berman hang his first show at the Ferris Gallery in 1957, a show that was famously busted for obscenity. And this book has its origins in a obscenity bust. Prima was producing a play by Michael McClure, another well-known beat writer, called The Blossom or Billy the Kid, but the theater had been shut down because of an obscenity bust, and apparently it wasn't for a play, but for, well, I say apparently, the afterword, written by Sarah C. Bancroft, speculates that what was actually happening here was that the theater shared a space with a movie theater that was busted for obscenity for showing the movie Flaming Creatures. And this was 1964, so it didn't really take much for something to be obscene in the eyes of the cops. But Herms had traveled all the way to New York from California and suddenly had nothing to do. And I think Prima felt bad for him, so she handed him a sheaf of short poems and asked him if he'd be interested in illustrating them. Now, Herms was not an illustrator, obviously. He was a maker of objects, an assemblage artist. But, you know, he was an artist, and he could draw. He wasn't a great draftsman. And he really didn't know much about printmaking. But it was suggested to him, and I guess he thought it was a good suggestion, that he make these woodblock prints. So he kind of dove into the process of making woodblock prints and made a bunch for this book. Let's see, how many poems is this altogether? Sorry. It's 36 poems, so he made 36 woodblocks, plus he made four, one each for a season, because the poems are kind of seasonal, which you'll see when I read some of them. So they collaborated on this thing, and the poems are great, I think. So let me read a few, and I'll show Herms' illustrations for each one that I read. Okay, we start off in spring. If this were an age when a god might call, how often I'd sweep my room. Isn't it true? And I do like the fact that Herms drew the god calling with a gigantic erection. One thing about these poems is that they seem very much about living the bohemian life, and this is one of them. Can't sleep. Inside my skull, an unborn poem is starting to kick at night. And Herms delighted in drawing naked ladies, at least for this series of poems. And the poem, and I have to say, Herms is pretty literal. What the poem's about, he draws in his own way. Naked and sleepy, next to your empty pillow, I herald April. Okay, here's a somewhat more abstract illustration, but still it fits the poem. The spring wind carries jagged piano music, calm and indifferent. I like that it is both jagged and calm. It's a great contrast. Okay, now we're getting into summer. Okay, here it goes. Your coat upon mine in the sling chair, and we talk the room between us. Sling chairs seem both a part of time, a part of history, and they also sort of the kind of cheap furniture that, you know, bohemian types might have in their apartments. Okay, here's a good one. No roaches in it, and it's better than nothing. Yesterday's coffee. In 3 short lines, that sums up the life of an impoverished poet in New York City, does it not? Okay, now we're getting into autumn. Okay, here we go. Dogs bark in the mist. The clothesline growls in the wind. At a door, nothing. It's sort of that experience of like hearing nightly noises and there's nothing there. My interpretations seem completely shallow next to the poems. I apologize for that. This one is definitely anyone who's ever submitted work for publication and just not heard back will relate to this. The empty mailbox, more sorrow there than my empty apartment. Now we're going to get into the winter poems. The wind dies, the child sleeps, no voice at the door, I light sandalwood incense. Apparently, Herms saw an illustration of a hand, or maybe a photograph, in a magazine, and he used that as his model for this, which is why, compared to some of the other images, it's so clean and realistic. Now, Diane de Prima, as a poet and especially as Italian American, relates to classical mythology, in this case, Roman mythology, often in her poems. This armless woman, silently in the blind night, waits the hands of Mars. Seems ominous. And then this one. Vulcan strikes lead. The iron-headed bird tilts and cries out. Snow in midwinter. One thing that's interesting about this is that while the woodcut is in blue, the thing that the hammer is striking has a little black lead symbol in it. I'm not sure if Herms intended that, but I suspect he was involved in the publishing of this book, which came out, I think, in last year sometime, but it was originally done in '64, but not collected as a book. Okay. New street lights in my city. Now the snow is blue instead of yellow. I assume that's because they changed from incandescent bulbs to some other kind of bulb, but it is true how the quality of the light changes how everything looks. Especially something like snow, which just reflects all the light. And here's one that seems especially like the urban bohemian in Manhattan. Wind in the still streets. How long it is the winter. The cats are thinner. And that is one skinny cat. Anyway, that's all I'm going to read for you. I appreciate your forbearance. I do want to say something about the publisher, X Artist Books. This publisher is owned and run by Keanu Reeves and Alexandra Grant. And so I'm going to pop up a photo of the two. And of course, Keanu Reeves is a famous movie star. And Alexandra Grant, I don't really know much about her. She's an artist, and her art seems, flipping through it through Google seems okay, but not super interesting. But she's also interesting in that she's not like, some vapid supermodel type. I don't expect Hollywood actors to always marry some young hottie. I mean, if I was a superstar like Keanu Reeves, I would search amongst the young hotties. But it's kind of cool when someone doesn't. I mean, it seems like a lame thing to be congratulating him on. But without knowing anything about her, she and Reeves decided to start this publishing imprint, X Artist Books, to publish art books. And this particular one I got because I'm interested in George Herms. Is beautiful. It's beautifully made, and it's the kind of thing that you would expect an artist book publisher to seek out, like a publisher like Siglio, for example. So anyway, that was Haiku by Diane de Prima. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.